If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and you are listening to the JonBenet Ramsey series. This is episode 13, JT Colfax. This is the mortuary transporter that actually became a suspect in the JonBenet Ramsey case. You cannot make this stuff up, people. This is one of the most unusual cases ever. I mean, there's over 100 suspects. I mean, there's just so much to go over. Obviously, I still have to go over the crime ring theory. There's so many other individuals, but I did want to touch upon JT Colfax just because this individual is one of the least talked about in the JonBenet Ramsey case, and I wanted to make sure the comprehensive, exhaustive coverage continued with logic and reason at the forefront, unlike any other podcast or documentary. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, find it interesting and informative, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Like and share the podcast. Keep up awareness in unsolved cold cases, unsolved murders, missing persons, and wrongful convictions, and more. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. Alright, so let's jump right in here. Let's, look at this article here. Relatively new article by Jason Arment, February 19th, 2022, on thebigsmoke.com. From mortuary transporter to JonBenet Ramsey suspect, an interview with JT Kofax. Jason Arment interviews JT Colfax surrounding the series of events and choices that wound him from being a mortuary transporter to a JonBenet Ramsey suspect and more. And supposedly this is the guy that allegedly tried to burn down the entire JonBenet Ramsey home, but let's get into it here. So, question, you're taking photos of the dead? JT states, I stole them, I shoplifted them. Then you request JonBenet's medical documents. I stole them. Let's start at, you're taking these photos that eventually get you into trouble. And the response, that was the first in one blob of trouble. Is that normal to say a blobs of trouble? It was the mortuary photos. I was all over the news and getting charges in 4 different municipalities. For the photos alone, when someone added fuel to the fire and snitched on me for stealing the morgue log papers that logged JonBenet into the Boulder Community Hospital morgue, which acts as the morgue in Boulder. Someone snitched on you? Another mortuary worker who wanted to be a cop. How did you get in trouble for the pictures? First and foremost, let's go there. Previous to this, I was living in San Francisco again. I was going to commit suicide and I went to Canada. I had this crazy idea called temporary Cobain that I graphed all over Vancouver. Chickening out of suicide, I thought I'll just go to jail in a foreign country, burn something down. I wanted to make it to the French side of Canada to learn French. Temporary Cobain meant to put yourself in suspended animation, just burn something down, go to jail, and be alive in 4, 5, or 6 years. That's very specific. This was back before Fight Club was a thing, before escaping from society became romanticized. What year was this? 1996. When JonBenet was killed. This is already shaping to be one of the most bizarre interviews ever. That Christmas, I had left San Francisco for a month and a half. I stayed in a hotel in Granville Ave in Vancouver, the Royal Hotel. I was just waiting for the day to commit suicide or something. Originally, I wanted to go to France to go to jail. Then I wanted to go to Montreal, but I was just stuck there. The hotel thought I was such a weirdo. Bitterly, I had to get up every day by 10 or 11 just so they can clean my room. They'd become really upset if I didn't let them in there for a day or two. There's no do not disturb sign in that hotel. My family was calling San Francisco frantic because I wouldn't communicate because I wouldn't even get the messages. And I was waiting to do all this. And the day after Christmas, I used the rest of my money to buy a ticket back to San Fran, but could only make it back to Seattle. I called my sister, she sent me the money, and I traveled back to Denver on a bus. Is this adding up to anybody? So he's trying to make it to San Fran, but then he goes to Denver. In Portland, at Oregon, at a McDonald's on a layover, reading the Oregonian, and somewhere around page 10, this is the first I ever heard of, and I didn't know how to say it. Weird name, JonBenet Ramsey. Then I go through epic blizzards and flooding, delay after delay. I finally get it back to Denver by New Year's, miserable and exhausted. Though, through the stress of trying to commit suicide for 2 months, I stayed at my sister's house. By January 7th, I guess that kind of makes sense. So if he's originally from San Fran, he was going to go to Denver by way of San Fran to get his stuff, but then if he has no stuff, whatever, he just went to Denver. Okay. By January 7th, 97, I saw a classified ad for a first call position in the mortuary business. At the time, I'd been that before, but I'd never seen an ad for it ever. Naturally, I hopped right on it. I come back a total wreck, then bam, I'm back in the mortuary business. The JonBenet case is raging everywhere. Now it's spread around the world, but it's just something in the background. I'm so depressed and out of it and starting a new job, I'm not paying glued attention to it or anything, but you can't live in Denver and not hear about it. It's giant. At that point, it was giant because of the police bungling. Also, her pageantry and that sort of thing. What police bungling? The police get the call early in the morning at 6 o'clock. They understand it's some sort of kidnapping, so they pull up the lights blaring in front of the kidnapping house. Anyone who has ever watched television for more than 2 hours know that is not the way to do it because the house might be watched by the kidnappers. And they have no choice but to believe this is kidnappers. The mother is saying that and saying there's a ransom note. That's interesting if that's true. So there's a ransom. They don't want the police to be called, so the police just show up lights blaring. Wow. Then the house fills up with people, and they let the father and a friend search the house. They walk right to a basement boiler room, and he's like, oh my god, there she is, and picks up the body, brings it up, and dumps it under the Christmas tree, creating trace particles everywhere. And his best friend also knew right then. Bringing you back? It does. I abused JonBenet in the media and for my own fun. What do you mean you abused JonBenet? As in, I didn't take her seriously and used for my own purposes. The heck does that mean? So probably more accurate to say that you were not respectful of JonBenet and the memory of her life. It chokes me up sometimes when I think about Fleet White and his wife, who were friends with the Ramseys and had dinner with them that night, Christmas night. And they believed so much in them. And then they realized they were being used, but that came later. Police mistake was that Fleet White and John Ramsey were told by police to go search the house for any kind of clues, when the house should be completely unoccupied by anyone but police at that point. And there is also the fact that John Ramsey, before the search, made arrangements with his pilot. They all intended to go to Atlanta for Christmas, but he told his pilot there would be a delay and they'd be leaving in a few hours. To me, it's the most giant red flag of all. Who do you think you are? Your daughter is missing and you're going to fly off to have your regular Christmas plans? But just on the subject of JonBenet herself, which I've had to deal with so long, some kind of cold state overtook me. I don't like seeing pictures of her and I don't like thinking about her at all. I only really thought of police bungling and my own problems. So you're telling me you made her into an abstract thought because it was easier to deal with the death of a totally innocent child. There definitely was something, pageants and the way she was presented, that made me think of her as a cartoon. Yeah, okay, next question. Yeah, it's sick, but it's typical Americana. I see what you're saying, but I don't know if it reflects poorly on the parents because it is so common. Response: it made me feel less about her. I suppose you could find some other 6-year-old who was murdered and I could feel more about it somehow. I definitely picked up children. I picked up a young boy, 8 years old, in Wyoming. What does he mean by picked up? Like, is he some kind of psychic? He was killed in an accident while riding with his father in a big rig. And I heard about it all the way up there because you can only get one radio station all the way to Casper. He picked up children? Like picked up radio transmissions of dead children that he's picked up, as in picked up interest? I mean, this guy talks kind of strange. When you say picked up, oh, okay, here's his answer. Picked him up as a dead body. I came from Denver to get him because they didn't have a good airport in Wyoming. These were lucrative jobs for me, by the way, to go into Wyoming. I picked him up fully ready, as in he was dressed and casketed. That was heartbreaking. A little boy in a tuxedo. It sounds like this impacted your psyche, so you're doing your thing. Life is going on. I hate the owner of this first call service. His name is James Colvin. I hate him. He's just an awful person. Now I'm out of my sister's house. I suffered from depression, and my sister loves me and takes care of me so much, but she didn't know much about it at the time either, as much as she knows now. I would stay at her house for weeks, months. I was always like a robot, uncomfortable, and they would wonder why. I couldn't help it because I was staying there. I don't know what to make of this interview. It's just bizarre. It's hard to be on all the time. Response: which made things worse. As soon as I started getting paid by the first call service, I moved to a slummy rooming house, which you could get very cheap for those days in Denver. How cheap? $80 a week or something. That's not too bad. What year was this, 1997? Answer: very early, January 7th. I was dirt poor, but back then you can get your own place and get out of people's hair. It was a dump. It was just a tiny room, and the owner was a tyrant. Scream, scream, scream all the time. He seemed to treat me okay, like I was different from some of the bums. Okay, we need to get where the rubber meets the road about the photos. Response: operating as poorly as I was, I did things like shoplift. I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in that rotten little room. Were you being paid while you were on call? No. You only got $13 a body in town. Wow, that's an interesting number. Is that the only town where it's specifically 13? And then the further out of town you'd get more, and you'd get a little more if you went on a house call. But they did add up, and generally I had one Wyoming trip a week, and that would be like $150 for me. Considering I'm paying $80 a week, the other $70 of the $150 is there, and then of course all the daily. Some days you pick up 10 $13 corpses. Other days you sit there all day not knowing. Wow, 10 bodies in one day? So I get the rig outside. It was a Suburban. As part of the ordinary mortuary experience, what happens is you've got two gurneys out there. You got sheets and various things because generally you go to the hospital to pick up the body. You lift up the sheets, pull them over onto your gurney. Then you throw your fresh, clean sheet onto the bed and the nurse signs off. During this endless standby, because I had these sheets I had out in the car, I started painting things onto the sheets, then I'd throw them onto the bodies later if no one else was there. I had keys or codes to get into the mortuaries. I never went to a mortuary just to do that. I always had a drop-off or a pickup. They would say things like getting fired isn't the end of the world. Obviously that was on my mind. Happy Halloween. I guess I was kind of thinking of them as greeting cards, but it made it look this very much confused the police in public. It gave the appearance that I stood around the bodies at night in the morgue painting for hours, but I didn't. I did it at home. Okay. Next question. Okay, so this is all going on. How do the photos of the dead come into play? Answer. So I take the photos. I have them developed at a Safeway store in 5 Points, which was very much a ghetto at the time. I get them from the counter in the envelope and then go shopping around the store and I shoplift them. Wait a second. The person who developed the photographs, what did they think about that? They'd be like $9 or $10 and I needed that at $9 or $10. One time I got busted. They saw me from upstairs or on camera or something. I took the inner envelope out and crumbled up the other thing and hid the photos. They knew exactly where. I get taken upstairs to the office. There is a real off-duty cop on duty. At first, it's all ordinary. I'm just a shoplifter who stole $9 worth of merchandise for not paying for those pictures. Wait a second. So he gets the pictures developed and then tries to steal them without paying for them? Wow. But then they opened them and life changed drastically after that because next thing you know, the entire Safeway parking lot filled up with cop cars. Filled up with them. There were cops everywhere and the cops' greed was incredible. I knew it was going to be weird when they discovered what was in the photos, but I didn't expect it to be so murdery. I didn't expect with all the mortuary equipment in the background of every photo, I didn't expect it to be so concentrated on that I had murdered these people. And there's a wide variety of people in the photos. They freaked out. That is kind of weird, though. Like, what are the cops? If these are the types of cops that show up to a kidnapping with their lights blaring, are these also the type of cops that think a murderer would actually get pictures developed of his murder victims and then when he comes to pick them up, he would try to steal them without paying for them, creating even more of a scene? Wow, okay. Describe these photos for me. The photos turned out to be taken in 4 municipalities. It's not like I cared as I took the photos where I was. It just meant I come in at 2 o'clock in the morning to this place, no one is there, so I can go ahead and throw something on this body and take a picture. So there's 4 different corpses. But of course, to the bane of my existence, I worked all over the metro area and further to Wyoming or Colorado Springs, and now I have cases in 4 different municipalities. And what is in the photos, the main thing is that it shows all these places. Every single photo had a corpse in it. I don't remember if there were any at that point, if I'd taken any strange, oh, this corpse looks disgusting, or giant, or fat, or armless. I think every one of them had been dressed up a little bit. Were you dressing them up? Dressed up as in throw a sheet over them with signage, or sometimes it was about a poster-sized paper that I had with me. What attracted the police so much was, well, it was all dead bodies with strange things. There was one where the mortician who later snitched me out on the JonBenet Ramsey morgue logs, I popped by his house. He was Mormon. His family was there. I had to go on a call. It was his birthday, and his mother gave me a party blower. And I had that on me. I didn't buy it or anything. I had it on me, and I had to go on call, so I stuck that in a woman's mouth, which was deeply haunting because it was very, very late at the time, and it popped right back out of her mouth. Then I realized her jaw had been sewn shut. But I did get it to stay in there and take that picture, and that one cost me dearly, I would say. Did the police not like that? Answer, it reeks of someone who has time to do whatever they want. Follow-up question. I feel like it's one of those dark humor things you can make it look terrible. His response, it was totally a dark humor thing. But you can also make it look totally innocent. Response, that was my surprise, as in, I knew I shouldn't be doing this, and what if this was your mother and all that? I definitely have come to that conclusion over the years. I was a little defiant at first. I was stunned by the arrest. I was like, this is art I'm seeing here. All these atmospheres and these bodies. Someone came up with this for me, called me a still life photographer. Question, wouldn't that be a still death photographer? His response, I thought it was clever. I understand, but a still life painting involves life. Okay. If it wasn't as if you were desecrating the corpses. His response, yes, I was. Were you charged with that? I was charged with that. I was charged with the abuse of a corpse, in which the main line in that law reads something like, quote, offending community sensibilities, end quote. I pled guilty, spent 2 days in jail. I was supposed to be released, but they kept holding me because that way cops from other municipalities could come. I'd been in Littleton. The cops called me and told me to come down to the Littleton police station right away or they would come get me. Then they booked me there. The charges kept coming even after I was released from jail in Denver. So I get there, and this horrible cop, like a TV cop, gets up to go greet the two. A detective from Littleton and a detective from Englewood, who came to charge me. I'm in a glassed room. I turned the law book the cop had been talking to was reading. I read the law about the abuse of a corpse. The other 2 detectives who just arrived cried out, he's reading the law, he's reading the law, like I just pulled out a grenade. What? Next, the interviewer then states, knowledge is power, my friend. His response, I will never forget that. Because I looked through the window like, what are you, stupid? I'm still going to be free to go after this. I'm going to be able to go to the library, which I did eventually, to make copies of that law. But this, he's reading the law. To your memory, you did not actually break the law? His response, no, I think I did. Next statement, next question, in your opinion, question mark. Response, do you want your mother dressed up with something that looks like a 60s sleeping bag? Interviewer response, it's a vague and poorly written law. It's kind of weird. I mean, is this interviewer just pandering to this guy? It's weird. His response here, it is vague, but there are so many vagaries of what people can do. And of course, the worst thing is when you're charged with abuse of a corpse, there is only one thing that everybody comes to. Interviewer states, they think it's sexually, but it doesn't have to be at all. Response, which reminds me, back to the very first arrest in Denver, after all those cops arrived at Safeway for that, was a shoplifting incident turned thing of interest. Were they really treating you like a serial killer? When I was finally put in a cop car and I saw the Suburban I was in charge of being left behind in the Safeway, and I was on the way to the police station, the police car screeches to a halt because another cop car was coming down the street the opposite way. Obviously, the driver of the car I was in was friends with that one, and he wasn't going to let that guy out of the loop on the big kill on me. He yanked up the photos from the front seat, ran across the street, and showed his friend through the window of his police car. That guy had nothing to do with the case, but it was obviously hot on the wires of all the radios. They thought so much they had a Dahmer. Wow. So the officer that's arresting him is just sharing the photos with these other officers. This is kind of weird. They weren't just trying to railroad you at this point, they're trying to fry you. Response: it was more greed. God, they hoped it was so. They really hoped I had killed 20 people and dressed them up, and they were in on the bust. Yeah, that's kind of weird. They were real glory hounds, is what you're telling me. It reeked of it. Why stop in the middle of the road and run over and show a cop who has nothing to do with the photos? Because you want your buddy to see the fresh evidence before it gets logged. You eventually make your way to some kind of precinct, you're booked in, then what? I'm in the homicide squad with a body tape outline on the floor to intimidate all the people who are sitting in the seat I'm in who did murder someone. It goes on and on about the photos and how I did it, how I had access, with me saying it's not that big of a deal. There were 2 detectives who were mainly doing this. I can't remember the other one's name, but one who still works for the cops is named Larry Valentine. Wow, that's definitely a movie cop name. He takes me, kind of does this buddy thing where he touches me on the shoulder. I don't think I'm handcuffed. I probably am. I certainly had been in the car. Maybe he takes them off. And takes me in the hall and down the hall a little bit. There's a holding cell there, but with the door wide open. This is not like an inmate-infested place. This is the homicide police hallway. He takes me there and sits me down and tries to do soft talking, nice voice, and mentions things like, sometimes we all get lonely. Wow. Bit by bit, he's trying to slice into the sex thing. When he did that, it was like a sinus headache like you'd never believe. It went all the way down my spine like, oh my god, because if it isn't about the idea that I killed these people, which obviously was never going to materialize as a case, so I wasn't worried about it, it was the idea that I had sex with these bodies. Did they ever outright ask you if you had fornicated with the deceased? Yes. Did you say no? Of course. Did they check for semen inside of the deceased? Not that I'm aware of. I bet you they did. You know, I've never been asked that question. Really? After all these years. Whether you fornicated or the semen. Oh, the fornication, I've been asked that for sure, but any mortician is going to be asked that for sure. Interviewer response: I don't think so, I really don't. JT Colfax responded: happened to me all the time. Maybe at a party or something? Yeah, that type of thing. But not at the cop shop. No. Okay, yes, totally different, but in casual conversation, that is something a mortician gets asked all the time. That's kind of weird. That's just bad dark humor response, but the gravity of being asked that when all you can say is no and say it in disgust. But there is no way that's going to prove in anyone's mind that you didn't. At this point, there is absolutely no proof that you fornicated with any of the bodies. Response: no, and there never could be. Because you didn't. Well, yeah, because I did not. So this cop is shaking you down, go forward. He's doing the friendly, good cop thing, and as soon as he verges into the territory and I realize it, I defend myself with, corpses are disgusting, I can't believe you'd even think that. And now I hate him, and I'm brought back in with the other detective because there is no good cop situation. I must have said, you can expletive off, that is ridiculous. I was righteously indignant, but I was also in horrible shock that this is never going to end. Interviewer states, bottom line, you're not playing ball, so you get brought into the room, and what do they say then? Response here: I did talk. I said this one is at the mortuary. They asked me. They had certain pictures they were more interested in. You even cooperated. I mean, I shoplift the evidence in a mortuary van. You're dead to rights. At a certain point, they showed me a black corpse. We had one black mortuary. There is only, to my knowledge, still just one black mortuary in town. They never called us, but they did once. And I took this black woman over there, and when they showed me her, I refused to identify where it came from, but it wasn't about her race or anything like that. It was their interest in her because she was different, and me realizing that I'm not doing myself a favor by identifying all the mortuaries where these came from. And it sure came to pass that it was terrible that I did. First, during this horrible day of being charged with all this and having all of this interaction with the police, I'm only charged in Denver. But then they reach out to my boss, who I never spoke to again. They go through the books and find out where the business had been lately and come up with all these counties and municipalities. I have charges in Denver County, Arapahoe County, Littleton, and I have charges in Englewood, both of which are in Arapahoe County, but they're separate home rule municipalities. Separate courts and everything. So I've got 4 separate cases, and I'm also thinking if they ever find this one was in Jefferson County, this one was in Douglas County, I'll be going to court forever. I stopped identifying the mortuaries, and they found it odd I clammed up on the black woman. That mortuary was such an offshoot weird place to go for me, it made me realize I need to stop identifying these places, period. I get taken to the Pringles Can City Jail downtown, where it's so airtight and awful. I end up staying there for 2 days, even though the next morning I went to court and got released on a PR bond. But I just remain in jail while they work on spreading the word. So I come out of the jail, I get to where I was living with the Mormon snitch. He tells me, I mean, has anybody ever called somebody a Mormon snitch? Is that an original phrase? He tells me there was this weird little blurb in the paper. I haven't been home in 2 days, so he knows something is weird. And there was this most hackneyed 1-inch thing in the Rocky Mountain News, not my name in it, totally all jangled and weird. Totally typo insanity. Like they put it as a place marker because they didn't understand the whole story yet. But then the whole media was on it like crazy. I agreed to go to the Denver Post building and get interviewed there. They confronted me with Paula Woodward and her team from Channel 9 News, the dominating news channel at the time. I tried to say the cops are lying on this and that and the other, and she was like, yeah, cops lie. She was not going to hear it. She was a real big expletive. She was the worst reporter I've ever dealt with. She mentioned me in her book somewhere, and I haven't even looked. I just know that I'm in there, and I have so low esteem for her that even though it's me in a book, I've never even looked at it. Then I'm out. Everything is a disaster. I have no job. I have no money. My Mormon roommate, who was into bodybuilding and very good-looking guy, could talk about nothing but gay. He thought I was asexual. We all three worked for the same company when I first started that first call thing. He quickly moved on to another job, but I worked with him some. He trained me, and there was another guy who was going into the Marines, and he quickly left. And when he did, by that time, I was now the roommate. Those two had been friends for years. And this guy who composed a letter to the Marines when his friend was in boot camp in USMCRD to destroy and hurt him, we used the name Demetrius. Acted like Demetrius was upset about him leaving for the Marines, a letter that could be harmful to him and made in such a way that it would have to be opened by someone else to figure out who to deliver it to, by screwing up his name. What kind of interview is this? This is just weird. Okay, continuing on. Did they keep him in? I never heard, but we made it on purpose so that it couldn't just go right to him. He opens it and goes, what the expletive? It was to him, yet not addressed quite correctly, so someone else would have to know. But the point is, they were friends for years before they joined that mortuary thing, before I came along, and this is what he wanted to do, to harm him with gayness. This guy was obsessed about being gay. When he moved into the place that I ended up living with him, some gay people from across the street gave him a plant or something. He spoke to them nicely, and he threw it in the yard after they got back into their house across the street, so it would just rot outside on the lawn. He was obsessed with gayness. So now I come back from jail. He knows the media is trying to dig in. I believe he even received phone calls somehow. So I've got to get out. I think I borrowed some money from my brother and stayed at the YMCA, which I'd picked up a corpse in before, by the way. I must have stayed a night or two because I got the call that I needed to go to Englewood or Littleton or some other police office I went to where I was charged for 3. Arapahoe County, Englewood, and Littleton, where I read the law. So I had to get out. I had nothing. The YMCA was only $120 a week or something, and I was under massive pressure. And I ended up starting the Ramsey house on fire. We're moving way too fast. It is very common for headlines to spur forward police activity, the interviewer stated. Response here, and as those headlines grew, the police would constantly put into the media notions of my autonomy with the body. They use the word autonomy all the time, which explains how I could throw these paintings on bodies and all that, but they used it in such a way that anyone in the public would automatically wonder what else happened. I believe the cops really tried as hard as they could to infer that, and that the media was like, no, he's just a kook. I did then start participating with the media and alternative media where I could say what I wanted. One cop told me, you're the one causing this, because I was in the media. But I never once called the media during that, never once. Interviewer states, by in, you mean involved? No. By me saying the cops did this, the cops lied, or anything like that, that's why they came and kicked my mattress over in the YMCA. When I'm so destitute and busted, they pound, that horrible cop pound, on the door and toss my room for no reason whatsoever. That's rough, his response. And they say, because of what you were doing, as in because I said this or that. What do you think they meant? Because I said anti-cop things in the media or engaged with the media, period. But I did go to that office where I read the law and got charged by those 3 different detectives. When I was in the waiting room after check-in, they had me sit down and a woman came and sat next to me reading that day's Denver Post with a huge article about my day. Just striving to make sure that I can see that. And you want to go, look, that's me, but you don't. And she was an Associated Press reporter, sitting right next to me beforehand. Then I go in and it's just a matter of fingerprints being charged in all these counties. It's not a big interview at this time because they already got all that from Denver. As soon as we were done with the paperwork, the police introduced me to her. They PR'd me with her. Were there any questions you answered to your detriment? It went everywhere and it ended up on CNN and all kinds of things. It was basic and I have nothing to complain about. But the fact that the cops arranged it and had her sitting right next to me to see if I would say something to her, she was definitely showing me that article, and there was an L-shaped series of seats and there were at least 14 other places to sit. And she sat right next to me reading the paper in a scrunched up way. This is while the JonBenet case is going on. You've got to remember that I know other morticians take pictures all the time. They have scrapbooks. The guy that owned the company had a scrapbook. Well, that's kind of weird. How do you know that they did? My 2 coworkers. I hated that guy. And as a first call person, to be told that you're going to be there at 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. and go off on all your calls and then you're going to be on call all night, no one ever does that. It was just unacceptable to me, as in, like, the one thing you do your calls and you go back home. If you need some sleep, you rest. You don't sit in an office in a tie all day. It's like 2 rooms down the hall and then a reception area and then an area for me at this point because the other 2 left. I'm sitting there watching a TV that installed. I hear mumbling, and he had handwritten a letter of all employees will do something, and then gave it to his mother out there, and so she types it up and comes and hangs it up next to the TV. Is this the most bizarre interview ever? Wow. I'm sitting there by myself as I'm the only employee, and I got up and looked at it. I wish I could tell you what it said. It was just boilerplate. All employees will do this, clean up their lunch debris or whatever. Wow, that's an interesting phrase. It's not like I did something to cause it. It was just a memo to all employees, and I'm the only employee. And I'd sat there watching it being typed, wondering what was going on. It was just 4 sentences with all this blank space. I signed it like a child with a crayon to take up all the space. I then went on some calls, and they harassed me the whole time with what is taking you so long and all that. And I say, it's expletive mayhem out here with the traffic. I never stopped anywhere. I never was much of a person to interrupt a call and do something else. So the pressure kept building on them, rushing me. And it's like, you made me go all the way up to Jefferson County. I'm in the parking lot going to the corners over there. And they're like, no. And that's when I went to the YMCA. They made me come all the way to the YMCA downtown in Denver because the police were there. So it's like, come on, give me a few minutes to drop this body off. Then I had to go all the way back to Jefferson County and drop that body off. The memo filled me with hatred already, and then the constant irrational rushing when anyone could look at that time I got the call and where I am now, and I really should not be that concerned about it. Maybe if you got out of your presidential office and go do a call yourself, the problem would be solved. So I said something like, I'll be there when I can be there, and I hung up. They caught me at another mortuary on the phone, and I hung up on his mother. When I came back, he was all like, look, we gotta talk, and he had that clipboard. What is the meaning of this? My huge scrawl. And he was like, you yelled at my mother. I told him to expletive off, and he barked, give me your pager, and that was the end of that. I immediately got a different job at a different place. This sounds like the job is not that regulated, and maybe it should be, the interview stated. Response, the only place I ever heard of that wanted people to sit in an office all day and then be on call all night. And aside from just the insanity of it, what is the point? There is nothing for me to do. If I don't have a dead body and paperwork to fill out, I worked for the next company for 2 months before the whole thing exploded, and it exploded on a better, nicer company. Not that they were great, but I really destroyed their business. And that first company, they went on talk radio and tried to say all these things, like the company I worked for when I got busted, they're full of criminals and all this, and a very popular radio host named Jay Marvin said, we know who you are. They tried to take advantage of it to boost their own business, when it's like, this is like mortuary secret stuff. Most people don't even know what first calls are. It's like you should keep your expletive mouth shut and not get into this when you own a company I worked for 2 months ago. Okay, interviewer states this. It does sound like Tiger King in a way. You've got these non-felonious things happening. You're not a felon, but this is when the other shoe drops, right? Tell us about it. This was a media mess, and it had gone national to some degree. Remember Paul Harvey? I was on that. I never heard it, but an inmate told me, it's not like I haven't done anything really crazy like the Ramsey house arson, but the things I put on the signs and all that, he read it as a kooky mortician in Denver does such and such. So I got all these corpses abuse charges everywhere. This is very bleak to me. I have nowhere to go. I'm borrowing money just to stay for a week here and there, and I'm seeing charges stretching out. Say I get a job somewhere, say Taco Bell, how am I going to go to all these court things for a year for 4 different municipalities? So everything is bleak as well. And the maximum amount of charges are being leveled at you. His response: the roommate that kicked me out that is obsessed with gays, he decides that in the midst of all this publicity, he needs to throw gas on the fire. He calls the Rocky Mountain News and gets one of the main Ramsey reports. The case is raging but totally separate from me at the time, and tells them how I stole the mortuary logs from the JonBenet Ramsey case. Did you? His response: which I did. Okay, how did you do that? I went to the morgue in Boulder. I was pretty drunk. I left for my rooming house in downtown Denver. I was talking in a three-way conversation with two drag queens from New York City. And they loved my mortuary stories. And then I get a page and they just can't believe it. You're going on a call right now. So this guy, this is just like a regular day for him to be in a three-way conversation on the phone with two drag queens from New York City. Okay. So I drove to Boulder Community Hospital from downtown Denver. I missed the highway exit that would go to Boulder, which I grew up so near, which is the most familiar highway exit in Denver to me. But I keep on driving and there is no exit all the way to Thornton. Then I come all the way back down and get off. I do get there to the hospital. The security guard has to take me down to the morgue. He whispers to nurses I checked in with and buys me a cup of coffee, one of those where the cup comes down and the coffee gets squirted into. That's really relevant. They know I've been drinking and they're very nice about it, but he's getting me a cup of coffee because of it instead of telling me we are not releasing to you. We go down into the basement. There's a podium with a giant book on it, and we start checking out my ordinary, dull, 50-something-year-old guy's body. I've got him sheeted up and on my gurney with a cover over it, totally ready to roll. We're right by the door. I've got to sign this guy out, naturally. Anyone who is bringing in a body or talking about it, you've got to or taking it out, you've got to log into this book to establish chain of custody. A knock comes at the door. I'm already like, no. Remember, I'm not in trouble yet. I showed my roommate the morgue logs the minute I got home like a schoolgirl. So I'm just about to leave, but a knock comes at the door, and it's your worst nightmare as a first call person. It's the iBank. What does iBank stand for? iBank, the iBank of the Rockies, EYE. Okay, keep going. Sorry, I thought it was some kind of an acronym. Response: so I'm a 2 and he's a king if we're playing poker. I have to roll the goddamn body back over, put it on the autopsy table. It doesn't take forever, but it takes a while. The security guard says, well, it'll be a while. And he arranges with me that he'll be back later for the checkout because I cannot take the body now. I roamed around the basement of the hospital. I stole a piece of a phone to get a longer cord for my phone because that is how I lived at the time. I couldn't spend any money on anything, and then it occurred to me. I'm in a dark conference room, and then it occurred to me that this is the morgue. And I'd propped open the door of the morgue with a magazine, and I did my roaming, bored, and kind of angry. I've been through this before, and I really hate it. If I'd been gone, I'd have been gone. Then have had to come to the mortuary and do this or something later without me. Now I have to wait, and I'm drunk. Then it occurs to me I'm far off in the basement away from the morgue, and then it dawns on me that this hospital also is, and that morgue I was just in, is the morgue that JonBenet had to go through. As soon as that hit me, I went roaring right back in there, grabbed my magazine, and let the door shut. I take that book on the podium and flip back through it because anyone knows the date, Christmas. And sure enough, how could she not be there? It is like a little lightning strike to me. There she is, and it's like, of course she is, how could she not be? And I'm in a big room with a security guard. At first, I took some pictures of the book, hoping that he didn't notice the flash, and nothing seemed to happen. Then it occurred to me, and I reached up to the top pages and carefully ripped them out. Okay, interviewer states this. A lot of podunk police departments still put out reports like that. I have not ripped any pages out yet, though, but I have been dumb enough to pay the money to make copies, not realizing what was happening. JT Kofax responds, I ripped those pages out, I can still see them. I can't envelope without making a giant mess my whole life. And yet I ripped these with really good precision, and I was a very heavily bound book, and I put them in my pocket, and I start looking around, and there is, like in any morgue, there are brains everywhere. There are jars and jars full of brains, and the thought occurred to me that JonBenet's brain is one of these. I never saw anything marked that or anything, but I bet it was. What else occurs to you in this place? Mostly just waiting and waiting. And then finally the guy is done. He leaves. I get a hold of the security guard somehow. probably by dialing a couple of numbers into a phone, and off I go with my body, my boring, dull, ordinary body, drop that off wherever that was, go home, hangover, etc. I did gleefully show my roommate and laid out the pages on the dining room table, and he was like, no way. It was obvious it was a thing, even though the info contained in the two facing pages was of no value. It would in no way change the case because it was missing. It was just when she arrived there who brought her and where she went, which was Christ Mortuary. Christ Mortuary up in Boulder, which I'd been to in my travels. And of course, 4 pages later in that book had been my signature. I'd been there before, I believe. So nothing happens to the bulk of the publicity. I'm going to talk radio, both local papers. Were they friendly to you? Yes, in most cases. I was just kind of an oddity, and all they wanted was just a couple of sound bites to explain, you see the craziest things, and I want to document it. And you didn't hurt anyone. On that front, I've got to say, if I'd gone to trial, I would have been confronted by the families. But the families wouldn't have even known. His response, they still don't. They still don't, as far as I know. But if I had been pressed to trial, they would have brought in the families to say, yes, this outrages my sensibilities. There's no way you can win with someone going, that is my mother, and look at her, she has a party blower in her mouth on a mortuary table. It would have never worked. When does this come into play? By the Ramsey morgue logs hitting. I'm at the YMCA and the next police knock comes. I did do a large interview with the Rocky Mountain News and divulged too much information in that, I think. The police were not aware that the pages were missing until that roommate of mine told the reporter, and the reporter called the police. That was a weird and intruding thing to do because I had copies of the morgue log and I hid them in a Vietnamese book in the Denver Public Library, not so far from the YMCA. Anybody voting this is the most bizarre interview of all time yet? I mean, can we get a poll going? I called the Rocky Mountain News and he came right away. I walked him over to the library. At first I was in terror. Oh my god, he's going to think I bull expletive him because the first Vietnamese book on the top shelf, the most inconvenient, biggest, thickest book in Vietnamese I could find, didn't have the logs. But I did find them and there they are. I gave him the copies of it and I believe they put them on the news because I believe I painted the copies or used magic markers and made it all rainbowy around her name with her name all yellowed, which I did not do to the originals. I'm sure that made you look fairly crazy, but keep going. You could almost see him ejaculate in his pants like, yep, I've got my story. I've got my story right here. And that night, the dreaded knock comes again. Not nearly as rude as your usual police knock, but a police knock nevertheless. And it's Detective Thomas and Detective Gosage, who are now quite well known to me and everyone as part of the Ramsey Detectives. They search the room. They're quite polite, basically. One was nicer than the other, of course. And they were like, do you have anything about JonBenet Ramsey in this room? And I told them no. And I told them I sent the logs to a friend and I'm trying to get them sent back here. They're arresting me for the morgue logs, by the way. But of course, it's all about the JonBenet thing. And they find in the closet some horrible collage I put together about some of the publicity. And there was a picture of JonBenet, a very elegant, inch-sized picture of her face. And they go, we thought you didn't have JonBenet in here. And I went, that's about me. Because the article below it, which they took as very indignant. It's not like I had it and held it. It was in the closet. It was an awful piece of mess that I was making to try to do some kind of piece of art and make some money. So they were antagonistic about that, like, you have a picture of JonBenet in your room. And I'm like, it's a tiny incidental picture. The thing is poster-sized and she's an inch. And the article is about me. They became almost apologetic as they went, we're going to have to put handcuffs on you. On the ride up to Boulder, the nicer one, Detective Thomas, whose life was destroyed by this. How was his life destroyed by this? Because he accused the Ramseys on Larry King Live on TV with them sitting right in front of him. He's like, I think you're good for it. I don't know why, but that makes me emotional because I knew him to some degree. The roasting of everything that was so intense in that case alone. Not with me or anything, but me too. His wife left him and all kinds of stuff. And he was portrayed as a wife beater with very little evidence. It was internet gossip. He was the smartest one of them. It was a great joy to me when I saw it on jail TV, him saying, I think you're good for it, Patsy. But he starts asking me about being gay in the car. In the most casual way. So were you born that way, or And I realized completely that this is not just chit chat, but it's also a bit of an interrogation. You know, the girl was molested, and he wants me to talk about being gay to see if I'm gay or not, because I don't present that way. Okay, statement from the interviewer here. A lot of gay men, and I'm not trying to tell you how to think, but the idea of a naked woman, that is just not the slightest bit appealing. His response, gross. It's never been appealing to me. I've tried it, I've forced myself to try it, but the point is that chit chat that wasn't just like, we've got a long ways to go to Boulder. How is being gay working for you? It was to flavor in their own minds about whether I could possibly, whether it's official or not. Cops need to suss out from a person if a case is molesting and killing a young girl. You're going to ask a guy who you've heard is gay. I get to Boulder, they show me words off the ransom note, which was highly, highly explosive at the time. It hadn't been released yet. Leaked to Vanity Fair later. But for me to be going, why was I asked that? And they swabbed my mouth and they took hair. They cut themselves, Detective Thomas cut himself taking a sample of my hair. I was booked for just the morgue logs. I got bailed out live on the radio by a radio host. I'm back out real soon, and I did immediately humiliate them by writing to a gossip column in the Rocky Mountain News. They were being portrayed as the Keystone Cops. They cut their own hands trying to take a hair sample. It was a terribly sad and horribly emotional moment for me to be asked these questions. Did you ever know JonBenet? Did you know John? Did you know Patsy or Burke? Just to be clear, you have never met any of these folks. No, but I did live in Atlanta when they did. Okay. Wow, okay. So is it just me, or all these individuals in Boulder happen to also have lived in Atlanta? I mean, is that strange to anybody? See, if it was like New York City, D.C., L.A., Dallas, doesn't that make more sense? I mean, Atlanta is not the most populated city in the United States. I actually just brought it up. Atlanta is the 36th most populated city in the U.S. So not even top 10, not even top 20, not even top 30. So statistically, out of tens of thousands of towns and cities, what are the chances that everybody in Boulder surrounding the JonBenet Ramsey case just happened to live in Atlanta also? Like John Mark Carr? I mean, what is going on here with these Boulder-Atlanta connections? I mean, or did JT Colfax just make that up to sound more coincidental? Can anybody prove that he actually did live in Atlanta? Okay, interviewer asks, okay, but did you meet them? No. You've never met JonBenet yourself? Never. Did you ever see her at a pageant? No, I've never been to a pageant then, now, or ever. If you wanted to go to one right now, I wouldn't go. That's an interesting way of answering the question. Okay, interviewer says, not really my scene, but I catch your drift. Response, there were a lot of murder questions, and it's foggy to me as to why I would be expected to, well, I was a suspect. There were like 8 or 9 words they gave me off the ransom note. Oh, they made me write them, and the most frightening part of it all was I do print. I'm old and I grew up with cursive, but I switched to print in high school, and there is something I do, like perhaps an A or something. It's still cursive to me or something, but there are letters that I did then, I do now, and always. And they were like, stop doing that. And that was very scary to me because the absolute essence of that is change your writing. Interviewer states, to match the killers, he responds, it strikes you. You don't want to change your writing. They shouldn't ask you to change your writing. They did. I can't imagine any scenario where you're having a suspect who is presumed innocent write and then you're yelling at them. Stop doing that in an angry, angry tone. Did you stop? I think I still did it, and when I did it again, they were disgusted. Perhaps they thought I was masking. But I'm scared because I'm not doing anything. I don't want to leave a bunch of words that they can find other things where they can be like, you totally lied in print with that. That's not the way you write at all. I wrote the way I wrote and still write. It was very, very scary to be told to stop doing that. It was just issues of certain letters that displeased them. I'm then driven across town to the Boulder County Jail, got booked. I'm just setting up my stuff on an upper bunk when some Mexican comes up. He's my cellie. He comes up from down in the day room and says something about the toilet not working. I just barely get things set up when I hear a roll up, and I'm like, what? How can I possibly be getting out of here? And Jay Marvin, who is barely still alive, was a big radio host in Chicago who I'd called from intake. He was very big for a couple of years in Denver until he fell ill. During that corpse photo thing interview, I would actually come and hang out with him in the studio and chip in every now and then. He was a very suicidal, weird man who would make remarks like, "I'm going to blow my head off after the show." He didn't have a problem with your dark humor? No, because I would say things like, "When they send your body home, make sure to call Delta Cares. That's the program." My voice would just come in. It would show the police I was sitting with him. It's not like I was on all day with him, but it's just like he is sitting in the expletive studio with him. Just little things like that. All of this is going on. The police, they're not happy. You're getting shook down. You've been let out. You're associating with the press, which might have saved your ass, or maybe it made it harder at that time. Who knows? His response, "And now it's the Ramsey detectives I've got. I'm busted. I've got all these corpse photos. I don't have a corpse photo problem in Boulder, but I did steal those morgue logs." That's what they came for, and that's what they charged me with. And probably something else, but only related to that. When do you start worrying about, "I'm going to spend time in jail, maybe I don't want to"? But here's the thing, I'm bailed out, but I have nothing now. The bail lady is all amazed I got bailed out by this radio host. I ask her where the town is, she lets me go, finishes out her paperwork, and then she sees me walking and decides to go ahead and give me a ride to the bus station. And I believe she may have shelled out a couple of dollars to help me get to Denver. I doubt I had anything. This was way out in residential nowhere, but she takes me to the Boulder bus station. Then I called my brother and he got me back into the YMCA, and their maid at the YMCA is like, yuck, when she sees that I'm back, because they know. So then I eke out my existence that way another little bit by borrowing money from my brother, who I will never be able to pay back. Then I realize I can't keep doing this. I have all these cases, and the sickest idea occurs to me because it's the only path I could think of. Everyone is going to go, obviously, and forever. There are some mental health problems, but the best I could come up with was to go to Boulder and expletive with the Ramsey house. Start it on fire. You think I don't want to go to these jails, which are rougher, but if I go burn this place down, his response, "I'm so glad you said that, because that reminds me, part of the logic of doing this drastic thing to start the Ramsey house on fire, because it occurred to me that I've been to some of these other jails, even if only briefly. Boulder's jail had a carpet. You can see on the bulletin board there is a movie on Friday and Saturdays. There is popcorn and Pepsi." The interviewer states, "So it's a jail for rich hippies." His response, "My future is I'm going to jail, so I'm going to choose the nice one. So I go up to Boulder, make all my cases be controlled by living in the Boulder jail. I start the Ramsey house on fire. I don't really get it going. I sit out there for hours and hours on their patio. I look into the garage and see Ramsey Christmas on boxes. Which, when you're looking at a house like that and see that, oh my God, it's so weird. I want you to talk about being freaked out at the prospect of going to a rough jail, so you think I'm going to take control of my future." It's an interesting question. His response, "It's just life itself, as in I can't keep borrowing. I hate it. It's expensive for my brother. I have to end that. I don't have a phone. Cell phones weren't prominent then. How am I going to go get a job? I'm all over the news. I don't have a place to be called at. How am I going to go to all these court dates? The future with just these misdemeanor charges is very bleak as it is. Now I'm suddenly in the media for these morgue logs, which bleeds into I'm somewhat of a Ramsey suspect." To be fair, logically, you were never a Ramsey suspect to a rationally thinking person. His response, "I felt secure in that myself, but that did not stop a lot of people from thinking that, and why shouldn't they? And I've just been greased over their faces for like the last 2 months, in town anyway, for weirdness in the mortuary business. And then it's like, aha, look at this guy, and the word suspect was used in some papers. This is the price we pay for our system." His response, "Now I'm in jail and I'm just thinking, okay, just a little rest here, and I get out of the jail within half an hour. But I've got nowhere to go. I eke out another week or two on my brother's dime, and then I realize that I'm in no mental health way able to get a job. I don't look like a person who should be hired. I am so corpseified myself. I look like a person who has been using speed for 5 years because of the stress of the last 2 months. Who is going to hire me? No one. And I have no way to be contacted or anything. It's impossible. I decide I'm going to start my inevitable jail time now. And I went up to Boulder. I had somewhere around $10, some of which was used to get up there, about $2.50 for bus fare. I sat around in the Pearl Street Mall for a while in front of Access Graphics, where Ramsey worked. I bought a soda and a hot dog. Weirdly, that was so important to some people. What did I do? Then I found a Manson-type girl, a very dirty, dirty, hippie, mean girl who was talking to me. And I told her my story, and I told her to come to Boulder to start the Ramsey house on fire. And she made damn sure I knew where it was. She walked with me for close to a mile, then she told me this way, that way. I mean, this does sound like some kind of movie plot. Was she attractive? No, she was a dirty mess. She was a Manson-type girl and not Marilyn Manson. Well, that's a less cool than that could have been, but keep going. This is an interesting interviewer here. She could see I was deeply serious. Did she know you were serious? She knew I was serious. I believe I had articles and things and I showed them to her. You had them on you? In my bag. Very John Fonte of you. Do you know John Fonte was from Boulder? Never heard of him. Famous author. He wrote about doing much the same thing, but go on. We sat at a picnic bench, and then she told me the rest of the way to the Ramsey house. She drilled it in. She made sure I knew it was very important to her. Interviewer laughs. He continues. I bet she bought a paper the next morning, so I made my way to 15th Street where the Ramsey house was, and I did not see it. I passed by it the first time. There were about 3 houses down, a woman raking. I asked her. She kind of sighed with disgust, but she was polite and pointed it out. She was sick of being asked that. It was broad daylight, say about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Other cars did come and take pictures. 2 tourist girls parked a car and got out and looked at the house with me, and I talked to them. This is when the sun is up? He responds, I don't do anything on the Ramsey property because of this. There are people driving around looking at this. But the 2 tourist girls, black and white college girls from out of town who came to look at it, we chatted briefly for a minute about the case and the freak show, all of that. Then they told me some of my story, and they became very uncomfortable, and one of them took a picture of me. I don't know if he meant to say he told them of his story. Was it ever published? No. If the internet was bigger then, she would have posted that somewhere. Now you just post it and off it goes. But anyway, she was like, do you mind if I take a picture? And she took it right away before I could even answer. Then they left immediately. I made them so uncomfortable. I don't blame them. Then I went to Chautauqua Park. The interviewer states, I'm published at Chautauqua. He responds, I guess ignoring that statement from the interviewer, and I'm sitting there smoking a cigarette at a bus stop. Luckily, there's an extra lighter laying there, knowing what I'm going to do. I wait until dark, roam around, then I come back to the Ramsey house and I go up and down the alley and up and down around the front. In the alley, there's a big area by the fence where you can drive cars in and there is no gate on it. It's big enough that 2 cars could drive in there at the same time. A huge gaping hole in the fence. So I enter the property that way. And I look around through the windows, peep through the windows, then I sit on the patio furniture and move one of the chairs so I can look at the house more. And I just sit there smoking cigarettes, totally miserable. This is so stupid what I'm about to do, I know it, but I also cannot think of a different plan. I mean, what am I going to do? If I call my brother for some more money, wait, what, another week and then I'm back where I started. So I'm determined. Oh, and by the way, some neighbors saw I was sitting out there, and they did notice that I moved a chair and was staring at the house. But they thought I was some kind of security because I wasn't doing anything but sitting there and staring at the house. I go into the crevice between the garage and the house, and there are Ramsey things and they have nothing to do with me. That lights up my brain from the glowing worldwide frame of the whole thing. Like when I look at that window and see the spiral staircase, it's like a little stroke of something like, oh my God, I really am here and I'm going to do this. Same thing when I look in the garage. The back of the garage has windows on it. I look in there and see boxes and boxes labeled Ramsey Christmas, and I wonder who boxed that up. The police? The Ramseys? Interviewer states, so this is the moment where you take back control of your life. You're lighting this place on fire where someone killed a little girl. You have nothing to do with it. Probably demonstrably have nothing to do with this, but you're internalizing this is the way most people won't because it's time for you to now seize control of your fate. He responds, and even up to that moment, I'm not any kind of expert on the Ramseys, which I kind of became later in jail. I was doing my mortuary jobs and running around town and all of that before, and being a person who lived in Denver with time on their hands with the job. So I'm sitting on the patio and I decide this is so miserable and awful, I can't sit here forever, asking myself if I'm really going to do this. And I review the fact that I have nowhere to go, nothing else is sensible, I'm going to jail, and I want to go to jail in Boulder. Why do you want to go to jail in Boulder? Because it's a young college town jail, without the hardened criminals and everything. I've only barely seen it, but I have seen it. It's clean. If I'm gonna have to go, I'd rather go here. So I do this, I commit a felony by arson, and make it so buses will come and take me to my court cases in the future and all that. I was never so relieved. I mean, the rest of the night was miserable. I ended up calling the police on myself. Were you worried about, in particular, that inmates might not hear you out and might just read the papers, and be like, you might be expletive up, you might be expletive little kids, and not hear you out when you say I'm basically goth? Well, I'm going back to the beginning, the Denver City Jail. I always called it the Pringle Can, a very bad atmosphere jail where there is no air. They knew. I was ordered released, but they didn't let me out until they got together with the other municipalities. Interviewer states, and these other municipalities had to have their stay. I got a personal recognizance bond. It takes forever. By forever, I mean 2, 4, 6 hours whenever they feel like it, but I was there for 2 more days. Okay, so then at some point you are literally held. He interrupts the interviewer here. My point for that was going back to that. I'm crawling the walls like, why am I still in here? I got a personal recognizance bond. More detectives came and interviewed me there, and they acted like, we're surprised you're still here. And I'm like, you lying mother expletive, you know you kept me here. When I get back to my cell, I get released. I get back in my suit coat. I looked ridiculous compared to everyone else. Going down the hall, someone unseen to me said, man, how'd you get corpses into Safeway? I'm too far away and almost out the door for conversation, but they knew something about it already. But they think I'm abusing a corpse in Safeway, on the ground, expletive, a corpse. Interviewer states, it's a macabre game of telephone, but you get let out, and eventually they process you back in, and they don't let you go for about how many years? For that, about 2.7 years at Boulder after the arson. That's a very specific amount. Take me back to when you're processed in for this. For the arson for the initial 3 years. The arson itself was they had an in-out mailbox. I reached in there and felt they had a cabinet in there, but that is all. From the JonBenet house. From the street, harshly zoomed in, the best they can do, a National Enquirer picture of a pack of matches. I left the tiny door on the mailbox open so that some air would get in there because it was failing the fire. I truly did intend to. I lied to the media afterwards when I said that it was just a tiny little thing just to get into jail. What I did could have started the house on fire. I did try. So you were taking one thing at a time. The first thing was burn the house down, then get arrested. I expected it to go up and for me to just be standing there like, yep. Wait, so he just put some matches in the mailbox and didn't... That's the fire? Well, okay. Tell us what happened. You threw some flaming stuff in there. What goes on? What are you throwing in there? Whatever I had that was paper out of my bag. Articles about me, the corpse thing, and I did have the paperback version of Interview with a Vampire. I've always equated JonBenet with that little girl because of that Claudia. You know, that bitter little girl who is stuck in a vampire's body. She grows up into a 100-year-old vampire, but I'm a little girl, remember? I don't remember that part, but I'm going to rewatch it now. Okay, response. So I throw out page after page of that on fire in there. Books of matches, things like that. Maybe I don't know if I had some of their mail or whatever, but I did not stop anywhere and bring any supplies. You didn't bring any accelerant, no gasoline, no oil. No, I couldn't have afforded it. Not a thing. That march all the way from downtown Boulder to their house is a couple of miles. I didn't even think to bring any of the multitudes of papers anywhere, not a pile or a few. So I throw these things in there, I go to the back patio and wait and wait and wait. Then I went back and the fire hadn't taken. And I did it again. Nothing happened, nothing happened. Then I think I threw the whole matchbook in there. Then I left, went the other way down the street, went all the way back to downtown Boulder, just as miserable as you can get. As in, anyone who sees me, people would cross the street. Like, this guy has something wrong with him. And I sat on a bench in front of a cop shop, you know, those little mall things, and there was a cop in there. Then he came out and locked the door and went, how's it going? And he even looked at me like there was something wrong with him. If he'd just engaged me in the slightest bit, I would have told him what happened. Then I went all night long in misery. I've left this mess, and it's totally traceable to me. I wrote something on a matchbook or something, I believe. The next morning, I'm exhausted. You can't take this kind of depression and exhausting without wanting to get off your feet. I slept at a restaurant called Mustard's Last Stand on a bench out front. The interviewer states, I've eaten there. Okay, Colfax continues. I called the police station and asked for either Detective Thomas or Gosage by name. Or in any case, I asked specifically for the Ramsey detectives. I told them it was JT Colfax and I was put right through. And this is at a time when idiots from all over the world are calling in like my neighbor did it and they live in New Zealand. What did you say? Have you heard anything? And they're like, no. And apparently I did say, well, I've done it again. Kind of like in the Gilligan way of I've done something really stupid. And that was in every article and got really bad because they made it sound like I've returned to the Ramsey house and I've done a thing. I told them what happened. At the time, I'm in front of the granola shop. There is a Malamute tied to a street pole. And the owners put it there and it went inside. The Malamute does what it does, doesn't like it that they went in. He looks bored as can be, but he's howling. So this is the atmosphere. This wasn't happening when I dialed, and now that happens, and the cop is like, what is that noise? God, the luck I had. It sounds like I'm standing on a child or something and just killing it. It sounded horrible. Anyway, I told them what I did. They said, we'll be right over, and a squad car came too. They all got there pretty much the same time. The squad car people put handcuffs on me. So that starts your 3 years in confinement? Yup, 2.7 years. I think Eric Parker's confinement was a lot easier to rationalize. They held him for years because he did X, Y, and Z, and it turns out he couldn't even do that, so they let him go. They held you for 3 years? Well, no, I was sentenced. You were sentenced to how many? Well, first it dragged on forever. 7 months go by and I get to court and it's an arraignment. I hated my public defender. I was like, arraignment? He claimed he told me that. I couldn't believe that my arraignment was 7 months earlier when I first went to court. He was like, you knew. I hated him. I asked for him to be fired. The judge was all like, maybe later. I was stunned that after something like 7 to 8 months that I'm still not even arraigned yet. I didn't know that. I thought I was. Because of the court appearance, which I was removed from, by the way. Why were you removed? So the next morning after, the fire, I go to court, you go to court, you get charged, the judge starts talking about the case, arson, etc. The public defender, who I've never seen, gets up and starts arguing about boilerplate expletive like a bond. I stood up and went, could your honor introduce me to that man who was talking about me? Which was like a needle being lifted off of a record. And there were reporters there. And that did get in, but they went, Colfax claimed that he never met his public defender. Like, I'm going to put on this show in front of the judge, and I really did talk to him for 5 hours. You had never met him? Never. Never even heard of him. Kerry Lackland. Everybody called him lackluster in jail. Everybody hated him. His reputation was well known. Boulder is a small place. For 2.7 years, meeting all these inmates coming and going, most people came for a few days or something. I used to deliver pizza to that guy. He's a huge drunk. And I would hear all these things about his house, like the house is just covered in crap. You never know whether to believe it. He did look like a drunk, though, and he was awful. I interrupted immediately and went, could your honor introduce me to that man who was talking about me? And he had to sit there humiliatingly and look at me and go, I apologize to your honor. I have not had a chance to meet the client. Then he looks at me and says, I am Kerry Lackland, and I'm from the Boulder Public Defender's Office. I've been assigned to your case. Did you ask for a new one? Not then. How long did it take? The media claimed I'd never met my public defender, but my public defender had to do this whole thing of saying, I'm sorry, Your Honor, so don't say claimed. Why not say the public defender admitted he had no chance to meet with his client? If your constitutional rights had been honored, you wouldn't have needed to. His response, but on the media front alone, to watch the way things got twisted in the media, who I always had a good relationship with before because they were doing art articles about me, like, say some bull expletive about your art, and it all goes fluffy and fine, or you have a bad feeling, to say, he claimed. This is the start of 3 years. Response, this is my first court appearance. It's for arson. The media is there, the stress is on, but weirdly I'm protected in a sense. Well, the court rattled me. That part being gotten up to be looked at, to have my charges read in front of the other inmates was not good. But in reality, the next 10 days I would say I was in a bubble like heroin. I felt nothing. I felt so at ease. I needed other inmates to go, look, you're on TV again, and I wouldn't even bother. I've never felt so relieved. I was totally relieved. It was an endorphin-style thing. People would say, you're so calm about what you're facing, and I felt nothing. Then you'd get filled with paranoia and inmate problems and all that. Although a lot of it was okay for a long time, there is nothing worse than being on the other end when you're at 2 years and 3 months, 4 months to go. Now it's very irritating. So after all this, a lot of railroading, you end up in jail. Response, so I'm in jail now, period. I'm an SMAN, special management. The public defender visits once or something, not much happens. 7 months go by, slight contact from him, maybe a letter here or there, but I don't even know that I'm not arraigned yet. It was just being in jail and letting it all go by. I'm taken by van from my comfortable Boulder jail to the other jails. I'm there for arraignments. I'm only in court for 5 minutes, but it takes me 2, 3, or 4 days, at least 2, to get back to Boulder, in which I've lost my cellmate or my single-person cell or whatever. It's agitating because I'm going to the real big city jails and living like that. At the worst of it, the intakes of things, I got put in with a very serious murderer who had been in prison for around 26 years. But he was up on a writ. I was in the writ pod of the Arapahoe County Jail. Pale as a ghost murder guy who was always talking about his case going, well, they say I bit her tits off. He's trying to scare the expletive out of me, and he is. Life goes on that way. I'm an SMAN for about a month, and they realize because of all the publicity and all that, and the weird charges, that is naturally where they put me. It's also segregated for snitches and stuff too, but no one thinks that of me. I got put into Gen Pop, and very first day when we marched down a hall to the chow hall was a big rack of trays. You grab your tray and go into the chow hall. When I was reaching for a tray, a voice from the line way back behind me with no way to identify who says something about, why did you kill JonBenet, or child molester, or something. And I immediately turned into a whirling dervish of clown publicity, and it worked. You are a very well-educated man to know what a whirling dervish is. So while you're in there... Man, this interviewer is interesting. His response, this is a very important point, though. Now I'm out and about with the people, and it's the very first thing that happens, and I cannot have everyone thinking I'm a child molester. So what do you do from there? I make jokes, I steal every piece of police paperwork I can find, I send it to newspapers, and I mock them. I show the other inmates, look at what I did, and they're all going, tell them about the food. They're all suggesting things for me to do. So you have access to the ear of the media while you're inside. Yes, because of my previous art projects and because of all the noise of what was going on, so I published some things that are banal. The very first one, I get my commissary order list and it says white power donuts on it. I ask someone and they say, oh, it's been like that for years. White power donuts. I get back in line to grab a different commissary list because I need the first one to order, and I send it off to Westword and they put it right in, just this weird racial thing, but it's just a typo. But they're using your every mistake against you. Everything I can pick on the jail for, and sometimes Ramsey things, but anything. Notices that we're going to have sack lunches on Saturday because the Broncos are in the championship. It's just a dumb notice on a bulletin board. But me, I yank it off. Broncomania in this town, of course, this is going to get publicized. As in, the media needs everything about the Broncos they can get. And how about some weirdo, the weirdo? I'm very well known at this time, and mind you, I'm going on the radio from jail to a show that gets 120,000 listeners. It peaked with that show, and I was a regular there on all the time. They were always leaving me messages. Do you remember the name of the show? Peter Boyles. He is now a nut on KUNS. He's one of those right-wing Trumpy nuts now. Libertarian weirdo, but too far, as in out of his mind. The fact that I did these things and they would show up in the media, everyone in my surroundings in jail knew and were suspicious of my charges related to JonBenet. That was the hardest time. The people in jail have some sleuthing going on in and out. You were never beat up for touching, in quotations, JonBenet? No, I got into many fights, but it was more of a I hate your face type of thing. So not related to JonBenet. Okay, what does everybody make of this Jason Arment article? So Jason Arment himself is a military vet. He served in Iraq as a machine gunner in the USMC. So this is how he conducted this interview with JT Colfax. So, I mean, every case, obviously, that has a lot of publicity, there are some weirdos that come out of the woodwork, but is the JonBenet Ramsey case unlike any other in terms of this? I mean, here's a little article from the Denver Post. Colfax free to be free spirit. July 14th, 1999. By Karen Aj. Boulder. The city's most famous transporter of the dead and would-be arsonists walked out of Boulder County Jail on Tuesday. So he got 3 years for attempted arson? I mean, how much arson was there actually? and got right to work at two of the things he does best, making himself a thorn in the side of law enforcement and making himself a public spectacle. His followers organized a mysteriously named 1000 Noodle March to protest their view of Boulder justice and to celebrate the release of James Michael Thompson, better known to web crawlers and JonBenet Ramsey investigation devotees across the country as JT Kofax. But the event, advertised on some websites, might have been more appropriately named the One Noodle March. Only a handful joined in the procession from Pasta J's restaurant, owned by Jay Alofsky, a friend of John and Patsy Ramsey, to the Boulder County Justice Center. Photographers and Boulder police who followed at a discreet distance far outnumbered the marchers. At the Justice Center, as confused passerbys looked on and news photographers snapped pictures, Thompson admonished Boulder voters to take the eel out of re-election. Wow. In an obtuse reference to Boulder County DA Alex Hunter, Hunter is considering whether to run for re-election in 2000. Thompson said he felt some obligation to speak out on behalf of Ramsey case followers and his former colleagues at the jail. He had assured himself notoriety and jail time by ripping from a morgue logbook a page containing a notation of the December 26, 1996 death of JonBenet. Colfax worked transporting bodies from morgues to funeral homes when he saw JonBenet's name in the book at the Boulder Community Hospital. A month later, he went to the empty home where JonBenet was found beaten and strangled, lit papers on fire, and shoved them through the mail slot in what he admitted was an attempt to burn down the house. According to police reports, Thompson spent the night at the house, then called a detective working on the Ramsey case and told him what he had done. What he did was get himself a 2-year stay in the county jail. While there, Thompson, as Colfax, penned a diary of sorts, a rambling concoction that was part a rare glimpse of life behind bars and part clearinghouse for the Ramsey case rumor mill. His letters were faithfully posted on his website. As he outlined for reporters his plans, a young woman walked up and asked, "Are you JT Colfax?" The woman held out a copy of Lawrence Schiller's book on the Ramsey case, Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, and asked the recent inmate to add his autograph. He obliged. "I'm a very jaded person, but I'm polite," he said. Okay, so that gives us an idea of the relationship between Colfax, the media, and the Popo in Boulder, Colorado. So here's where we're going into Mindshock land. So let's go over a breakdown here regarding JT Colfax, an inside view of JT Colfax on ode2colfax.tripod.com. Remember tripod websites? I mean, this was like GeoCities back in the day. You had GeoCities and Tripod. So here, I wonder if there's a date on this website here. It said it was last updated June 30th, 2004. But, okay. Part 1, James Michael Thompson, a.k.a. JT Colfax. On December 25th, 1996, the night JonBenet Ramsey was murdered, JT Colfax was staying at the Royal Hotel on Granville Street in Vancouver, Canada. On December 27th, he was crossing the Canadian border into the U.S. from Portland, Oregon. By the 28th, he was on a bus headed for Denver. He got a job as a cadaver transport driver at M&M Transport in Denver, moving dead bodies for morgues. Colfax was a grave register clerk in the U.S. Army in '87 and had previously worked in the mortuary business in San Francisco. Colfax was arrested April 30th, 1997, when he left Safeway Photo Processing in Denver without paying for photos processed that turned out to be photos of corpses he attached funny signs to. I mean, also, who developed those photos? They didn't raise the alarm. On May 7th, 1997, he was charged with corpse abuse in Denver, Englewood, and Littleton, Colorado. On May 22nd, Colfax stole the December 26, 1996 morgue log sheet from the county morgue that showed when JonBenet Ramsey was taken to the morgue. With that, JT Colfax became a suspect in the JonBenet Ramsey murder case. On June 13th, 1997, Colfax was arrested again, this time for destruction of property, when Colfax angrily beat the receiver against the payphone he was at in downtown Boulder. Wow. What? He didn't mention that in the interview. By June 16th, he lost his job at an apartment he was staying at the Denver YMCA. On the 18th, Colfax was scheduled to appear in court on the charge of abuse of a corpse. So he was smashing the receiver at a payphone, which a lot of people do when they're frustrated. They just slam that phone down. Anybody that's watched movies from the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, that was kind of a thing to do. People don't really seem to abuse their cell phones as much. Obviously, in a rage, people do throw their cell phone and smash it. But smashing the receiver of a payphone, that was that was not a rare event in the heyday of the payphone. Now, what's weird is, were the cops just randomly around where he's just frustrating and he smashes the receiver down? It's also unclear how many times. Angrily beat the receiver against the payphone? Was that 1, 2, 10 times? Who knows? But apparently a cop was there and was like, wait a second, you can't be abusing that payphone. On June 18, 1997, Kofax went to Boulder, Colorado, and attempted to push burning papers through the front door mail slot of the Ramseys' vacant home, the house where JonBenet was murdered. Nobody reported the fire or that a stranger was on the Ramsey property. That night, Kofax slept at Mustard's Last Stand on Broadway in Boulder. I burned it the day I came to the end of my rope financially. I sat on the Ramsey patio with a duffel bag containing my typewriter and a phone and a radio. I forced myself out of the patio chair to go do what I did so I could stabilize my situation and free all the legalities I had before me. Only 2 months ago did I finish my Denver corpse photography case. I saw legalities stretching way out before me. I handled it in the desperate way that I did. Okay. Out of desperation that nobody reported the fire, Colfax called the Boulder police the next morning and talked with Detective Ron Gosage to tell him what he had done. Gosage was shocked. Colfax reported, and that told him that nobody had reported the fire. Colfax was arrested on June 20th, 1997, and charged with arson. He went to court January 16th, 1998, and through a plea bargain deal that included Lou Smith and Trip DeMuth, Colfax was charged with criminal mischief and theft between $100 and $400 and sentenced to 2 years in Boulder County Jail and 2 years probation that would partially run during time served. So criminal mischief and theft is 2 years? From the legal arrest documents, another story is told beyond the charges that were filed against Colfax. Between the night of the fire and the next morning, when Colfax turned himself in, one of the investigators named Jennifer Gedde from the Christman, Bynum, and Johnson law firm had been to the house and was aware of the fire that morning, but failed to report it to the police. The plot thickens. Why is this random lawyer there? In the police report, she said she reported her discovery to Brian Morgan, but Brian Morgan didn't report the fire to the police either. Jennifer Gedde was an investigator for H. Ellis Armistead, hired by the Ramsey attorney. What? Other additional interesting factor was that Colfax had opened the mail door slot with his hands while attempting to shove the burning papers into the slot, yet Officer Zamora dusted the mail slot for latent fingerprints. He reported there were no fingerprints on the mail door slot. So the question remains as to why Jennifer Gedde or even the Ramsey's attorney did not report the fire to the police and what happened to Colfax's fingerprints on the mail slot door. Wow. While serving time in jail in Boulder, Colorado, Colfax met another inmate named Lance Matthews. Although Colfax stated later during a July 28, 1999 live chat that he had some issues with Matthews while they were both incarcerated together about using his name in news articles along with Matthews, Colfax did ask Matthews to check out the Mrs. Brady's URL website when he got out. After Matthews was released from jail, he moved to Albany, New York, and Colfax began a snail mail correspondence with Matthews. Those letters, in the form of handwriting and art doodles, became the Colfax diaries. From October 14, 1998 through June 1999, Matthews represented Colfax officially and unofficially on a 10-month promotion gig. Matthews logged on to the Boulder News Forum on the internet on October 9, 1998 under the hat name of Matthews and started a thread titled What I Heard While in Boulder, and within days, JT Kofax police reports were posted on the Rod Herring website. Shortly after that, the owner of the Justice Watch forum put the JT Colfax website online. Matthews then got another internet poster known as Wilton JR to maintain the website for him until it was hacked on January 3rd, 99. Wilton Jr. would later be accused of being the hacker when Matthews posted on the Boulder News forum that only 3 people had the password: himself, Wilton Jr., and Chris, the owner of the Justice Watch forum. During the 10 months Matthews was a member of the Boulder News forum, he posted daily diary letters that Colfax wrote in jail and sent to him in the mail. Matthews added additional help from a friend of his named Lisa Flowers, who moved from Boulder, Colorado to Albany to stay with Matthews. Lisa helped transcribe Colfax's handwritten letters so they could be uploaded to his website. The postings of the Colfax diary letters on the forum drew mixed reviews from other forum members, some whom criticized Colfax for his criminal activities and others who felt that Colfax was just another victim of the system, even though he injected himself into the system. Colfax's diaries were full of interesting stories and also included some Ramsey case tidbits, like the Dean Cole story, the discovery that a wild party was happening the night of the murder near the Ramsey house, complete with hand-drawn map, Colfax's additional collection of jailhouse art doodles, as well as parody stories, mail art projects, and campaign projects, helped him keep his mind focused on what he does best, and that is communicate via his writings, his project, his art, and the media. Okay. Wow. So, one step at a time here. Let's look at the Dean Cole story. So, this is Colfax diary here. Message from October 17th. On Friday, October 16th, in the kitchen, some of us trustees and one jail employee were casually discussing the R case. A new kitchen trustee named Dean Cole went by and came back to join the conversation. Cole said he installed the marble countertops in the Ramsey kitchen 5 weeks before the murder. Cole specifically recalls the Ramseys wanting the job done by Thanksgiving, but it wasn't finished. Cole spent 2 days at the Ramsey house. Cole said the Ramseys stayed elsewhere because of the mess. Cole said he met John Ramsey and that he was a real nice guy. Cole said he didn't find anything weird about Ramsey. Ramsey inspected progress and left. Others were in the Ramsey house doing other remodeling work. Cole said he did enter the basement of the Ramsey house to obtain buckets of water from the water heater. Other workers from other companies working elsewhere in the house did the same. Cole said the police never contacted him about anything to do with the Ramsey house. Cole said they may have called so-and-so, and Cole mentioned a couple of his employees' names, but Cole had no knowledge of any remodeling workers actually being contacted by the police. Cole said that the Ramseys signed off on the marble job the day after it was completed and that they were happy with it. End Cole story. Are these the kinds of things you web people want to know? Should I bother with them? I realize it's just a snippet that doesn't necessarily point to anything, but it certainly could explain the high-tech boot mark. Cole lives 2 cells down from me. I guess I could ask him about that, but I don't really know him, and it's embarrassing to interview people in this situation. Oh, and I have no idea what Cole's case is, and that I wouldn't tell you. More on Cole. I asked him about high-tech. He doesn't have any. Couldn't resist asking, though. He is in here on very minor charges and will be gone before this is posted. Okay. Someone should ask Blue Lou Smith why he never talked to any of the remodeling workers. The shoes? The shoes? Anyone could have stood in high-tech shoes. Cup of diarrhea in your face, Lou. So that is this journal entry. So that opens the door, though. So how many? So there were countless workers, construction workers, traipsing around the house and the basement, including that boiler room area. That's curious. Very, very curious indeed. All right, now let's go to the next Mindshock. This wild party that happened to be going on. So here is this Colfax letter. An entire party gets thrown under da bus with 2 S's, splat. So this is posting Ramsey infested for April 23rd, 24th, 25th, 1999. Greetings and welcomes to the pages of the Encyclopedia Lockdownica. Last week, an idiot named Hamilton didn't get his way in court, and he did proceed to rip from his neck a crucifix made from string jail style. He threw it in the corner, proclaiming it didn't work. With malicious third-degree intent to haunt, I shall now tell you the Ramsey cut that was related to me over this long, cold weekend. While Mr. and Mrs. America were doing whatever it was they were doing that night in 96 in their home on 15th Street, it turns out that there was much more activity in the vicinity that has previously come to light. There was, in fact, a wild party a few doors away from the Ramsey house. I am hearing these details from 2 inmates that were at the party. Hold on a second. So this guy just happens to be in prison with construction workers who happen to be in prison, who worked in the Ramsey home. He happens to be in prison with not one, but 2 inmates who happen to be at a wild party right near the Ramsey home? Does anybody else find this strangely coincidental? And keep in mind, supposedly JT Colfax also lived in Atlanta. Not Chicago, not New York, not Miami, not LA, but Atlanta. Okay, so 2 inmates were at the party, one of whom I'll name. He is Al Laughlin. And you can find dirty details of his legalities by scrolling for his original heroin-related arrest on the Boulder Camera and other Denverish papers of September 96. He's now back on a violation of probation. I wonder if he knew Michael Helgoff and that crew. That'd be curious. Is there any overlap with Helgoth, some of the construction workers, or some of these inmates who attended this wild party near the Ramseys? Al was the keyboardist with The Samples, a band that was able to sell out Red Rocks, 9,000 seats, 3 times, etc. I'm sure details like that are in the news reports of his arrest. Anyway, Al says he was at Boulder Fox Theater until about 2 a.m. Christmas night 96. Okay, so he and others enter into a caravan of automobiles and head to a party only doors away from the Ramsey house. All these doped up people park their cars all around the neighborhood, anywhere they can find a spot, and proceed loudly to the party house. Did Jesus H. Christ see to it that there was plenty cocaine and hard liquor? Well, yes he did. And more people arrived throughout the night. Al's unidentified friend here told me it was rager. It was a rager. And Al says people were disappearing into the dark corners to undulate their thrusting, throbbing bodies together. So get this, when Al decides he's done enough cocaine, drinking and undulating for the night, he focuses his attention on breakfast. So he and others walk outside where the sun has just recently come up on a snow-reflected world of yellow crime scene tape. Cops look at them, they look at the cops. There is fear that this is a drug sting. The partygoers, by drugged instinct, go into dead silent mode at the sight of der Polizei. But they get in their car and evacuate without a word being spoken. They proceeded to Dot's Diner, where speculation on the cop scene gives way to idle chatter on just who grinded with whom last night. Later, everyone at the party will see Ramsey News and stare off into space with a slack-jawed look, thinking. Meanwhile, what about H, the other guy, Al's old friend, who also got out of jail on some minor thing on Sunday? He said he left the party before Al did. He called a cab, and so this cab, with a driver whose name might have been Bruce, comes that close to the Ramsey house at the intersecting time of around 6 a.m. on that morning. So H gets in the cab and everything is normal. He's been driven by the same driver many times. There's no world of crime scene tape evident, but just then the cabbie does open his mouth and say, "Look at that cop hauling ass." And so screeches in what might have been Officer French's car. H says, "Let's get out of here," and off they go. And before any Mindshock listeners want to chime in, no, I was never a cab driver in Boulder. But wait, there's a few tiny grains more for you Ramsey mainliners. Later, H gets a call from the cabbie. A warning call. Beware, the cops are checking on cab calls for early that morning. A little girl was murdered. They've been given log indexes about your ride. Wow. The punchline is the cops never came to talk to H, even though they requested and received taxi info about him. What a thorough investigation. Thereby, they never found out about this party, which had people roaming 15th Street all night during the critical hours. The cops never inquired at the party house. Meanwhile, people like Al and H and all other attendees of the party have been running into each other, as Al and H just did here in jail, for over 2 years, and there are various combinations of people who have been whispering, of course. Did the cops ever come? No. That sort of thing. In the beginning, when the first news reports began to air on TV, the attendees actually speculated along the lines of, what if somebody from the party, etc. You can imagine how the rest of that notion would trail off. I spent the entire weekend pestering and repestering. Is repestering a word? For more and more on this, and so I figure about $17,000 will suddenly appear in the mail for me next week. Right, for being a prodding, probing, suspicious L. Yeah, right. You web people can't manage a 20-cent anonymous postcard. Anything to make me aware I'm not talking to myself. I shouldn't leave out that I did get a nice little reaction soon after the blueprints of the jail were posted last week. Oh Lord, yes, the whole module watched as several officers spent a half an hour unscrewing the light sockets in my cell to see if anything was hidden there. How many times have I seen that happen to anyone else in almost 2 years of watching? I'll tell you exactly 0. JT Colfax, quite an interesting individual. But wow. So we have a major mind shock here. So there are all of these upstanding individuals snorting coke, drinking, and doing other drugs who go in and out of prison who happen to be partying hard in the critical hours when JonBenet Ramsey is alleged to have been murdered. Does anybody else find this weird? Does anybody else find it strange? And does anybody find it stranger still that law enforcement never even bothered to contact these felons and criminals who were doing drugs in a house right near the Ramseys? I don't know what to make of this. This is Mindshock. Make of that what you will. I don't even know if this information has ever even been covered on any other podcasts or documentaries on the JonBenet Ramsey case. When you have this many criminals and druggies wandering the area at the critical hours, I mean, what does everybody make of that? What does everybody make of that? He actually also drew a map here where the party would have taken place. He calls it the Ramzilla house, the Ramsey house. So apparently it was not far from it, a couple of houses over. Either way, he's not sure exactly which one, but interesting. There's another post here, Colfax Diary, June 8th, 99. Received word from the temporary grave. Stop. Al Laughlin is still at the prison reception center in Denver. Stop. Very unusual to languish there for so long. Stop. Did he mention an interesting thing? Stop. Why, yes, as a matter of fact, he did. Stop. Morty the mortuary pie giggling on a shelf somewhere over this item. And the envelope, please, with real small at the end of his note, he writes, oh, my friend Gully, who used to work at the Fox Theater as a bouncer, and who was at the party near the Ramsilica, blew his head off in Houston. First shot his wife. So now we have someone placed very near the Ramsey house on the night in question who later did go on to commit murder and suicide. Your Honor, I rest my case. The Ramseys can't be proven guilty, so gimme some money. Munnayy. And I told you all along, Jameson, whatever. But if anyone is interested in that sort of reasoning, I'm sure you can find mention of it if you scan the Houston papers of probably April 1999. There was a small mention of it in Westward's Backbeat feedback column by M. Roberts in maybe early May 99, but I didn't know he was at the party, so it passed by without memory much. Huh. Okay, another interesting post here regarding this, where the plot might thicken even further, if you can believe that. So apparently, this is this an email? Party near Ramsey's, suicide info available June 29th, 2000. Posted by JT Colfax. Back through Les Mists du Time, I wrote about how Al Laughlin told me he had been to a party very near the Ramsey house on murder night. And one of the attendees went on a move to Houston where he killed his wife and then committed suicide. I finally went trolling through Westward's archives and find a mention of the incident. I tried Lake Chronicle to Houston, but I don't have a credit card, so I can't even pay the paltry $4.95 it would take up for a more detailed report on the incident. But to see the Westward mention, wish I could know how to supply a link. You can find it in the feedback column by Michael Roberts in the May 13th, 99 issue, about halfway down. The guy's name was William Gully. He committed these acts on April 17th, 1999, so it's probably in the April 18th issue of the Houston Chronicle. If anyone here lives in Houston and subscribes to the Chronicle, you can access all the info for free. Otherwise, a day pass costs $4.95. Gully ran No Violence Productions. Okay. His wife was speaking to someone on a cell phone during the argument, and due to this conversation, they are sure it was Gully who killed her, then himself. He was 36 years old. Westward says he put on a lot of hip-hop and underground parties and was trusted by the Boulder police for his party management. In a related note, Al Laughlin, the inmate and former Samples keyboardist who told me about the party, was recently extradited back to Colorado for violating his Colorado parole via drunk driving in Massachusetts. He's not in prison, though. Okay, whoa. So this guy runs No Violence Productions. He does underground parties, and the police not only know about him, but they trust him? I mean, is there some kind of drug running in these parties, and it has something to do with the police, and this is why they never investigated any of the individuals at a drug party, these hardened criminal individuals at a drug party right near the Ramsey home the night in question? What does everyone make of this information? So he has No Violence Production. He ends up killing his wife and then himself, and he's at this party. Who else is at that party? Is it possible that the Ramseys are involved in some kind of satanic abuse, and JonBenet Ramsey was abused, but her death has nothing to do with that abuse and those circles of politicians and possibly police? Because if a criminal from a nearby party in some kind of drug-induced rage committed this crime and the police covered it up for other reasons, is this the kind of tangled web that would prevent the case from ever being solved? And there are articles in the Houston Chronicle corroborating everything JT Colfax just said. Houston Chronicle, April 18th, 1999. Man kills self after being charged in wife's death by Eric Hansen. So what does everybody make of this? JT Kofax brought to light that there was a bunch of construction workers. I mean, that was kind of known, but he added some specifics that they definitely went into that boiler room area frequently. All different types of workers for different construction companies. And then also this discovery of the party. I mean, JT Colfax is really rubbing shoulders with a lot of criminals. And is it weird that in that rich neighborhood that there's this massive drug party going on just a few houses away from the Ramseys? I mean, does anybody find that strange? Like, what is going on in Boulder, Colorado? Feel free to leave your thoughts, theories, rebuttals, debunking, suggestions of any kind in the comment section. And all the Mindshock listeners can find a way maybe to make sense of all of this information and the lack of police investigation and all of these strange coincidences, because this is really, really tough. But I hope you guys all enjoyed another edition of the Mindshock podcast, the most comprehensive, exhaustive, and logical case analysis of various true crime cases. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Like and share the podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.